At the heart of England lies a palace. It's not the residence of a king or a bishop, but the reward to a man who freed Europe from domination. This is Blenheim.
This is Climbing Great Buildings. Throughout this series, I'll be scaling our most iconic and best-loved structures, from the Normans to the present day.
Way.
I'll be revealing the building's secrets and telling the story of how British architecture and construction developed over 1,000 years. Today's great building is the finest example of the English Baroque style, a style that lent itself to grandeur and ostentation. It's just to the north of Oxford and home to the Dukes of Marlborough. It is Blenheim Palace. Blenheim Palace, built from 1705, is one of our best-loved stately homes, famous as the birthplace of Winston Churchill. But its origins lie in the European wars of the 18th century. The French king, Louis XIV, was determined to create an empire to rival anything the world had ever seen. His armies were rampaging across Europe. However, one man stood in the way of total French domination: John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough. In 1704, he won a bloody and decisive victory over the French at the Battle of Blenheim, destroying Louis XIV's ambitions to rule Europe. Queen Anne, and by extension the joyful nation, were so grateful for the victory, they gave Marlborough the manor of Woodstock in Oxfordshire. With it came a brand new palace, which would be paid for, it was understood, by the royal purse. So the Duke of Marlborough commissioned maverick architect John Vanbrugh to commemorate his victorious battle in stone. And what Vanbrugh created is the finest and most imaginative English Baroque palace in the country. I've been given unprecedented access to Blenheim so I can reveal the secrets behind its construction and get a perspective of the palace never seen before. Helping decipher this building is one of Britain's top climbers, Lucy Creamer.
No, you're going to break your leg if you do that.
I'm not.
And a trusty team of riggers, along with all-action cameraman Ian Burton.
Yeah, rolling.
I'll climb 100 feet to reveal the meaning behind the many sculptural symbols that adorn Blenheim.
This is the French cockerel that's being savaged by the English lion.
I'll reveal the secrets behind the construction of this wonder in stone. Everything's stuck on, using iron. And I'll test the limits of my courage by shooting across a zip wire to gain a unique perspective of this audacious Baroque masterpiece. Blenheim's a monument to courage, isn't it? So I've got to exercise some. Wherever you look at Blenheim Palace, the architecture tells the story of the Duke of Marlborough's epic victory. I'm starting my climb at the western entrance to see how the tale of the Duke's heroism was translated into stone through flamboyant sculpture.
Okay, Liz, how high do you reckon this is?
Oh, 30 foot?
30 foot?
Yeah.
You know that Vanbrugh measured these out in column inches. Let's do it, lady.
Let's just climb.
John Vanbrugh had a varied and checkered career, including stints as a merchant, a soldier, and reportedly a spy. Vanbrugh turned his hand to architecture when he was commissioned to design Castle Howard in Yorkshire in 1699, but he was best known as the writer of bawdy and satirical plays. I'm intrigued by the way Vanbrugh combines theatre and architecture. He was a child of the swinging 60s, the 1660s, and brought up in Chester, a city with lots of medieval architecture. That must have influenced him. Then he became a soldier and was incarcerated in France. That made his health suffer. And so the guy had seen some life before he became a playwright, and he used that experience to win over audiences. He knows how to manipulate, to capture people. And architecture's no different. This is just a great play in form and space rather than words. And it certainly captures me. Vanbrugh's wonderful play in stone is set within over 2,000 acres of rolling Oxfordshire countryside. Everything about this palace is intended to be dramatic. One of the first things that strikes you about Blenheim is the incredibly rich colour of its Jurassic limestones, with hues ranging from pale pinks to deep burnt orange.
Don't you feel like we've climbed through the warm half of the spectrum.
The warm half of the spectrum.
You know,
That's a
it's like
nice phrase.
Red and orange and yellow, and the stone is all kinds of colours,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it is. It's baffling.
One of the reasons for the vast array of colours was that shortly after construction began, it became obvious that local quarries couldn't supply enough stone to complete Vanbrug's vision. So limestone had to be brought in from around the Cotswolds. But limestone quarried from different sources contains varying levels of iron, which leaches out, causing different levels of discoloration.
I have seldom seen a house so orange, I've got to say.
It's been on the sunbed a bit too long.
Hasn't it? Like a gently toasted palace.
It's not just the ostentatious golden hues of Blenheim that give it its majesty. It's the sense of proportion as inspired by the buildings of ancient Greece and Rome as translated by Renaissance architects. With its sweeping symmetry, spreading forecourts and distinct classical accents, Vanbrugh gave Blenheim the ancestry of great ancient civilizations.
The last great house I climbed was Burley, dating to the late 16th century, and it was delightfully different on each of its sides. But through the 17th century, especially into the 18th, symmetry became the order of the day. And Blenheim has a straitjacket of classical symmetry. The kitchen court and the stable court are identical on both sides, despite their different functions. But symmetry is only one of the motifs that Vanbrugh had to conform to. The other was really the use of massiveness, the play of light and shade and form, and the way in which the portico slides out and creates a greater sense of scale. It was all part of the game of designing in the Baroque age.
As a reward for England's epic victory over the French, Vanbrugh, who was often criticised for the lack of subtlety in his plays, was never going to let his audience forget the achievements of his central character, the Duke of Marlborough. So Blenheim is littered with flamboyant reminders of the Duke's finest hour.
That's fantastic, look at that.
You've got a good view there.
I love it. Look at these big cartoon whiskers. Look, I mean, little whisker holes. This is the French cockerel that's being savaged by the English lion. The lion looks really happy with himself. And at a scale that makes that clear to you down on the floor, if you can see him. But only by climbing can you see the fabulous details, the cockerel's bulging eyeballs, marvellous. And for an early 18th century audience, flush with the success of having beaten the troops of Louis XIV, this is a triumphal piece of theatre on Vanbrugh's part, on a big stage.
From 40 feet up, I can see how Vanbrugh manipulates classical architecture. By mixing shorter, plainer Doric columns with taller Corinthian columns with more intricate capitals, he gives the building a real sense of both strength and grandeur.
Thing is, it's got that character of the military, isn't it? Do you think?
Very sturdy, strong,
Blokish.
sturdy. Yeah. Quite macho.
All the way around, it's all Doric, and there's a fat, squat proportion, muscular-looking things. And yet you get to the central section, and it's this more feminine Corinthian order. But that was a bit of an afterthought, that whole pediment being brought forward. Because there's a whole section of Doric columns there as well, but Vanbrugh pulled them down, changed his mind halfway through.
Wow.
It's funny you could afford to do that. It shows that he's making it up as he goes along.
Yeah.
And I think as a designer, he's got a bit of a magpie brain, because there are bits and bobs from all over the place. It's not just one influence, but it's all kinds of things being brought together, yeah.
From the outside, Blenheim is a vision in stone, but its exquisite features wouldn't have been possible without iron. By using iron to join the stonework together, it enabled more flamboyant masonry to be crafted, as mortar alone would not have been strong enough to hold the stone together. The ironwork, however, has been cleverly hidden from view.
Oh, wow, look. It's an elephant.
So it is. The rest of these things, of course, are all flowers, aren't
They're
they?
just
I can't
flowers.
see any other elephants. Must be where a mason's come along and repaired it and thought, do you know what? I'll just
Let's
do that.
just
No one's
shove an
going to
elephant head
notice. Unless they've got a film crew and climbing gear.
Oh.
I wanted to have a look at this. We're at the buttock section of a warrior.
Yeah, we've got the best side here.
But of course the back side of sculpture is where you see the tricks of how it's all assembled, because, you know, complex thing. Imagine cutting this whole thing and then lifting it into place. That's not going to happen, is it? So everything's stuck on using iron. There, look, iron pins
Okay.
used to stick
sort
on the
of-
various parts. Yeah, and that's typical. See the iron,
Yeah.
it's called a cramp.
Ah, right.
They usually have lead around them to try and stop the iron corroding, but it doesn't last forever. And so you get bits like that. The shattered ball should have been somewhere like that,
Yeah.
and now it's come off. And in fact, you can see the socket where the iron was,
Yeah,
look.
yeah.
The iron rusts, and of course it expands, forces the stone apart, and then you're left with a liability, and there'll be other little bits and bobs sticking out, as you
Yeah.
think, you know, just fragments of stone there.
It's not just the fine sculpture that's held together with iron. Much of the masonry at Blenheim is fixed together with thousands of handmade U-shaped iron cramps. These cramps would lock the stones into place, giving greater structural strength, allowing for quicker construction, as the masons didn't have to wait for the mortar to set before continuing to build.
Okay, John, show me how you shape it.
Right, that's up to temperature now to start working. Now you can't hang around with it, so you basically if you work it well, you can generally do one side straight away.
Because, of course, they will have cut stones to slot that into, so the size has got to be accurate.
Absolutely.
How long does it take you then to take a bar and to heat it and shape it?
You can make one of these. I keep feeding those with bars readily available, and you'd make 100 in an hour.
100 in an hour?
Yes, keep going.
Just one person?
Yes, you would probably have a feeder, somebody to look after the forge for you, and just keep feeding, and then you swap over, work as a team.
And before mechanical fans came into being, you'd presumably have an assistant with bellows, would you? Or would you do that yourself?
You would have an assistant, or if you were based near a watermill, then you'd have the watermill driving the bellows.
So if you had 6 competent blacksmiths, you could knock out 500 or so of these an hour?
Yes,
Well, that should keep the place going, shouldn't
that's right, but they'd soon use those quickly as well.
When restoring Blenheim Palace, masons now use stainless steel, as it doesn't rust or distort. Having negotiated my way around to the northwest tower, I'm now ready for my next climb.
Look at that swan out there, Luce, just taking it easy.
It's lovely. Very tranquil.
Yeah. It flies when it wants, swims when it likes, but you're making me climb, lady.
Sorry.
That's more like hard work.
No, you're fine. You're a professional now.
Well, what I want to
What do you
see is that, you see that tower over there? Mm-hmm. There are 4.
Okay.
And you know, Vanbrugh wanted to give his buildings something of the castle air.
Okay.
So I want to get up there and have a
Right.
look and see how he did it.
Excellent.
Yeah? I found, in the course of this, I'm a pretty good dangler.
Yeah, you do a good impression of a dangler.
I'm going to get a T-shirt with "Born to Dangle" on it.
Blenheim Palace may appear to be the epitome of the grand English stately home, but having been built in the short-lived English Baroque style, it's actually a rare gem in Britain's architectural landscape.
So, Jonathan, you keep mentioning this word, Baroque architecture. I've got no idea what it means.
Baroque comes from 16th century, early 17th century Rome. And it's basically architecture as theatre, which convinces people of authority. So whether it's powerful church architecture,
Okay.
or if it's grand palace architecture, it's all about persuading people,
I see.
to make them awestruck.
And Blenheim Palace is truly awe-inspiring. The beauty of its dramatic Baroque architecture is that it arrests the viewer and demands a response. With its scale, rhythm, and dizzying array of rich and gilded statuary, one is constantly reminded of Marlborough's power and military accomplishments. Nowhere can this be seen more clearly than at the top of the building's 4 towers.
Well, how about that for a view, Luce?
It's pretty good.
It's the first time I've ever seen Blenheim, the whole lot from one place. It's
It's
incredible.
fantastic,
Incredible,
yeah.
isn't it? You take it in. And you realise this giant pavilion we just climbed, to have 3 others like it, for the sake of symmetry, But, you know, the person who's got to carve the ducal coronet gets an order for 16 of them. you know. It's not, one won't do here, will it?
By Monday, please.
But these globes are on every roof. There's 2 golden ones on the top. But there is his coronet on a big globe. Looks for anything like it's the world, you know. This man, in the English eyes, has conquered the world.
He's put himself on top of the world.
16 times. But what a fantastic spot, though. Look, you can see to the horizon from here. I wonder if they ever walked up on the leads and had a look and really enjoyed the place. Or I wonder if it was a giant building site that's just a burden for their entire lives.
They'd have missed out if they didn't come up here.
Yeah.
Vanbrugh designed Blenheim to be a monument to Marlborough's epic victory, but it was also supposed to be a home for the Duke and his wife Sarah, the Duchess of Marlborough. Sarah was against Vanbrugh's appointment from the start, wanting the much more experienced Christopher Wren. She felt Vanbrugh had no concern for the family's comfort. Instead, he just wanted a show of ostentation. Now, Jerry, what was it that Sarah and Vanbrugh disagreed on so much?
Just about everything. Sarah hated the whole project. She hated the scale of Blenheim and what Vanbrugh had proposed, even though the original building was much smaller than what he finally ended up building. She wanted everything to be neat and plain and useful. These were her watchwords.
So how did relations between Vanbrugh and Sarah play out?
Badly. She had her eye on the bigger picture and how much money was being spent. This project cost £240,000 of Treasury funds, and it wasn't even half completed. Now, if you compare that again with Castle Howard, which cost £70,000 to complete at roughly the same time, you can see the scale of the extravagance. And had Vanbrugh not decided to leave of his own accord, he certainly would have been sacked.
So you have a building that's half completed, it's going to cost a fortune, the client doesn't really want to live in it. How was this thing ever finished?
Well, in 1712, the building work was stopped, and after Queen Anne's death in 1714, a decision had to be made what was going to happen. The Duchess and the Duke, but the Duchess really, decided that they should complete the building because her husband had set his heart on it. And so they spent their own money, and to their great credit, within 5 years from 1716, the building was largely finished. But obviously when people now look at this building, it is Vanbrugh's building. And the difference really between a good building and a great building is the architect's vision.
Blenheim Palace is undoubtedly Vanbrugh's vision. Despite he and the Duchess acrimoniously parting ways, construction of the palace was completed the way he intended. For my next climb, I need to nip down one story, but as I start my descent, I'm given a sharp reminder by Lucy I still have a lot to learn.
No, you're going to break your leg if you do that.
I'm not.
No, you won't break it, but it's gonna get trapped underneath at the moment. Just go down a little bit more.
If you could clarify a little. No, I didn't mean actually break your leg.
When I said break your leg, I just meant
break your spine.
Just meant a gentle sprain.
Putting fears of my imminent death aside, one of the great joys of climbing these buildings is that they reveal unexpected details.
What are these doodahs called?
They're dentals.
Dentals. That's a good name.
Because they like teeth, aren't they?
I like that.
Goofy.
They definitely need to watch the old dentals.
I'm descending back down the side of the tower to enable me to investigate the magnificent north entrance, the main focus of Vanbrugh's epic design. Its scale and style more resemble the entrance to the Pantheon than a family home. In order to get up close, I have to cross a zip wire.
Whoa!
Look at you go, Ian.
Ian, the cameraman, goes first and shows me how it's done. It's time again to throw caution to the wind.
Ready?
You ready?
Ready, Dr. Foyle?
Well, you know, Blenheim's a monument to courage, isn't it? So I've got to exercise some. Ready?
Yeah? 1, 2, 3.
Fabulous.
Awesome.
Well, that's an improved view.
That was great.
But that's great to see the pediment sculpture from here. You can see the cannon at the bottom of that pediment there.
Yeah.
It's only from here that you see it. Because from the ground floor, of course, there's that sill in the way. You have to stand back
Yeah.
several hundred feet to be able to start to take the full thing in. And then in the middle is the coat of arms. But around the coat of arms is the on y soit qui mal y pense of the Garter Knights. Evil to him who evil thinks. It's a 14th century thing. Edward III created the Garter Knights. They're typical fighters of good against evil.
Right.
And he is one, and he makes it pretty clear he was.
Yeah.
You know, people still want to be knights. Even though it's 18th century and the Age of Enlightenment, you know, people are looking back and respecting that kind of tradition. One thing I hadn't really noticed, Luce,
Yeah.
for those figures, they're beautifully cut, aren't they, those characters on the parapet? It's like slightly dandyish, really, for warriors.
Got a little tilt of the hips there.
Yeah, they're beautifully cut. Looks like the female figure, looks like the wind's just caught that drape of hers, doesn't it? Yeah, just enough to show off her shapely legs. That was great.
It was really fun, wasn't
I
it?
really enjoyed that, yeah.
Good.
As if the pediment wasn't enough to underline Marlborough's achievements, Vanbrugh really rams home England's pleasure at a victory over the old enemy, France.
Hey, we're met by a couple of slaves, Luce.
Oh, yeah. Not looking so good these days.
Pretty unhappy characters, aren't they, with their arms bound behind their back in some tortuous position.
Yeah. So this was a sign of wealth, or...?
Yeah, and you know, I'm thinking, I think I recognise the pose of the one on this side, because there's a famous Roman sculpture of the dying Gaul.
Okay.
The Gauls were the Roman French,
Yeah.
and George and England loved copies of the dying Gaul, just to remind themselves of how much they didn't like France. Because look, over the top, there's that big golden globe.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's the sun, and if Louis is the Sun King, and that's what he's done for his people, the sun rising up over a pretty miserable bunch of enslaved people. If that's right, I don't know if this is right or not, you know, to what extent do you read into this stuff, but that character then, with a trident, if that is a take on Britannia,
Yeah.
and from the north front, she's seen in the foreground, in front of the vanquished lot, then here is England triumphant,
Parading
France
there.
overthrown. Bit of theatre, isn't it? And that would be Vanbrugh. Architecture is theatre. It's just that we are, you know, we're in the scenery here, aren't we? We're in the stage.
We are behind the scenes.
Yeah, we can see how he's doing it. Gosh, just a peek down there into that great hall.
Wow.
Through beautiful glass, it looks original. It's very rippled and bubbly.
Yeah, it is.
Gorgeous stuff. So let's have a look then at the interior, shall we?
Yeah, let's get in there. It's massive.
How do we do that? Oh no, not through that window. You have to get in there.
We've got to climb through this small hole.
From the sublime to the ridiculous.
Yeah.
This tiny access hole will lead me to Blenheim's interiors, which house the glorious library and 2 grand state apartments. Although these apartments incorporated a state bedroom, their design meant they were so opulent and formal that they weren't for daily living. They were simply expressions of status and social hierarchy meant to impress guests.
By the turn of the 18th century, any palace worth its salt in Europe had to have a suite of state apartments, linked by doors set en filade. That means like this, all in a row for ease of communication. In this room, the Green Writing Room, there's a tapestry commissioned by Marlborough himself to show the submission of the French and his victory. But the greatest set pieces remain in the central block. Now, by this time, the medieval Great Hall had split into 2 reception rooms. This one is the saloon, beautifully painted and now used as a dining space, but still, the grandest of them all remains the Great Hall.
The epic Great Hall is the centrepiece of Vanbrugh's design. Standing 67 feet high, it was intended to inspire visiting guests and give an almost religious feeling upon entry.
That's got to be the most complex climbing rig. I'm trussed up like a Christmas turkey just to get about 25 feet off the ground. But it'll be worth it because I want to have a closer look at the central, the most impressive space of Blenheim Palace, the Great Hall. First look, architecturally, with 1 row of round arches above another one, and then a clear story. It's like some take on a Romanesque cathedral, and it has something of a religious aura about it. Temple, cathedral, call it what you will. but I want to get to know it better, so up I go.
I'm just going to use the shunt rope just to hold you away from these lights, basically, Jonathan. Do you know how much these cost?
No.
It's over £100. £250,000 each.
Are they really?
Yeah, so we need to be really careful.
With my eyes firmly fixed on those horrendously expensive lamps, I gingerly make my way up.
Well done.
Okay, Luce?
Yep.
Need to get into the middle of the room, please, yeah.
Okay. Nice and slow.
Like some Baroque astronaut.
How's that?
Brilliant, thank you. It's good because I've now got a view of the extraordinary south wall of the Great Hall. It's more than just a wall. It's a great niche carved out of space, like the proscenium arch of a theatre, the kind of thing that Vanbrugh might well have used. And it has great columns adding weight and drama to it. There's a balcony, more or less level with me, where Mr. Burton, the cameraman, sits. And you expect an audience. The portraits behind it give you a sense of that. And there's a bust underneath, so you meet Marlborough face to face when you come in the door. Now, this whole thing, the theatre, the temple-like atmosphere, is Vanbrugh at his best. I mean, a playwright turned architect. This entire glorious space is a fusion of things past and present. It's unbelievably clever.
This whole magnificent room is looked down upon by one of Britain's most exquisite examples of a Baroque ceiling. It was painted by the same man responsible for creating the wonderful artwork inside the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral.
67 feet up, the eye is drawn to this swirling painting, painted in 1716 by James Thornhill. It shows the Duke of Marlborough, dressed in blue in the middle, as a warrior, kneeling to Britannia and showing her the battle plan of Blenheim, at which even Mars and Hercules are surprised and admiring. He's surrounded by a host of gods, but there at the top is the muse of history, Clio, and she writes in her annals on his great victory at Blenheim as they usher him through to the Temple of Fame.
Ultimately, the Baroque was a short-lived era in English architecture, spanning only around 40 years. Soon after Blenheim, its grand ostentation proved too much for more reserved British tastes, but its legacy is some of the finest architecture in the world.
Blenheim claims to be Britain's greatest palace, but it was built, of course, not for a ruler, but for a family. And to that extent, you might say it's the culmination of great house building in England. But it's more even than that. It's a national monument, a statement of pride after a major victory when England was in the ascendancy. The only natural response to Marlborough's great victory was a fanfare in stone.
Next time, we move on to the 19th century to witness industrial Britain's triumph over nature at Clifton Suspension Bridge.
And we'll be climbing the bridge on Monday at 6:30. Next night, exploring the life of Pope Benedict XVI. And later, our school season continues with the trials of the children's first day. The Big School Lottery at 9 here on BBC Two.